I kind of develop almost a sort of persona. It does come a little bit from what I do on YouTube as well. And so I play a little bit more into like character.
Hey Mila, welcome to the show.
Hey, so nice to see you again.
Yeah, for sure. Likewise. How did that LinkedIn Live go? Was there a lot of response afterwards?
Yeah, absolutely. And even Jess texted me earlier saying that one of her coworkers checked it out and thought it was really cool. So I was happy to hear like word of mouth is still very much a thing.
Yeah, with all the digital stuff like online ads, word of mouth is still one of the strongest forms of marketing because there's already trust involved and they're more likely to buy, right? Like a good portion of my clients come through referrals, which is again word of mouth. Whether it's people that have saw my content but never use me, they would recommend me just based on my content. And then the other way would be I have happy clients that end up referring me to one of their friends or people in their network. So again, like the word of mouth is always the strongest influencer compared to the other cold tactics like Facebook ads or uh, SEO or other forms of marketing slash advertising. And I had Jessica on a few weeks ago, and I know that you are also a business owner in the form of copywriting. You also do some acting and modeling as well. So I wanted to get you on because the big disruptor right now is AI. I am a career coach, but I also write resumes, and some resume writers might be a little nervous with AI. There's a lot of content out there saying, "Oh, this is how to create your resume using ChatGPT," right? So people think resume writers think that they're going to be extinct because eventually these people will just use AI to write the resume instead of hiring a resume writer. But obviously, I've also heard stories about how recruiters know if a resume is AI generated compared to someone who's actually wrote it by hand, which goes back to that you can't get AI to completely do it for you. They can assist with you to give you foundation, but you still have to like write it for yourself, right? So that's why I want to talk to you today about copywriting and how disruptive AI is with copywriting. So before we get into that, why don't you tell my audience about your copywriting career so far in terms of like how you got into it and how have you built the business that you have today?
It's really interesting. When I first got into writing, it was actually traditional journalism back when I was doing my bachelor's. But then I really quickly realized that I didn't like it. And so I kind of wanted to experiment through different avenues. And I was freelancing for a long time before. Um, I was doing a lot of magazine writing. I was even a theater critic at one point. And I just was everywhere, trying all sorts of different genres and working with different kinds of brands and people. And it was really good in a way because it really um, encourages you to adapt to a lot of different writing styles and to also really broaden your horizons, learn different perspectives, and to really connect and empathize with other people, like when you do your interviews or even when you're just interacting with them. And that's how you get inspiration or just experiencing things in everyday life, right? And so that was sort of the thing for a while. And then when I finished my bachelor's, I did some like as a manager editor. So I managing editor. I did work for a magazine for the summer, and then after that, I went back to do my like it's like a professional certificate for brand journalism. And the funny thing about that is that the name of that certificate over the course of the year that I was there to complete it was constantly changing its name. It went through many different names. So it was at one point like content marketing, and then it ended up being like omni-channel and content marketing. It's like this really like long title too. It's somewhere on my certificate, but I completely forgot what it was, and I don't know where my certificate is. But anyways, and then I went corporate And so I was working as a brand journalist at a healthcare union. And then after that, I decided that I wanted to try my hand at the whole freelancing thing again. And so for the past couple of years, I, was really like just doing my best to build a clientele until I, got to the point when I realized, oh, there are actual content agencies. And because we were talking about Jessica before, the funny thing about her is that her brother and I went to school together. We went all through like primary, middle, high school together, and we're the same age. She's like, I think a year or two older than us. And so during that time, like I barely knew her. We never really like interacted all that much. But in the past year or so, because I was also really trying to connect more with people on LinkedIn and trying to gain more insights and really wanting to understand how to like market myself properly and just getting into all the negotiations and um, not only learning and taking in what others have to say, but also being able to form my own opinions and being a critical thinker and figuring out how am I going to present all of this in a way that's compelling and that's kind of galvanizing for people who would probably want to respond back and kind of create that community with you. And so I feel like this past year especially was really transformative for me in that regard, because it also led to me finding out that some of my other friends who I went to school with also started their own content agencies, and so getting in touch with them about those things. At first I was a little bit nervous, thinking, oh, I don't want something like this to potentially ruin friendships or anything like that. But I don't think it can. I think as long as you know what your boundaries are, if you're able to kind of separate like what's the sort of business administrative stuff of things and what can be left for casual friendship, creating bonds sort of things, then it's fine. And I feel like I've really gotten way more into copywriting, but also copywriting. It's not just, oh, you're only writing copy for a website or you're just doing like slogans and stuff like that, right? There's a lot of different things that you could do with it. And it doesn't all have to be promo. It doesn't have to be too salesy all the time. You can still be very humanistic about it. You can still very much, and you're also being genuine about it, because, and you have to be, because if you have, if you're principled and if you really do have certain values that you want to be reflected in your brand and what you do for the people around you, then of course it's going to be reflected in your writing and whatever other content that you put out there for people to see. And that's ultimately how you're going to get them to want to build with you, to invest in you, and to advocate for you before others, right?
So you started off with going to corporate, right, in copywriting, and then you wanted to venture into freelancing. So what was the turning point where you decided to give freelancing a shot and leave the corporate world behind?
I think it's because, you know, there's this old mindset where it's better just to stick with one company, especially if they're giving you all these different benefits, and it might be hard afterwards to try and find somebody else and to convince them to hire you or to give you the time of day just for any reason whatsoever. And you become so used to the kind of work that you do for one company that you don't stop to consider, what if this gets disrupted somehow one day, And look at now, for example, hybrid work is on the rise, freelance work is on the rise, gigs and all of this sort of thing is very much booming right now, especially like post COVID. Um, I said to myself, you know what, even though this seems hard right now, and to be honest, and this is kind of echoing what you said last time about paranoia, where people kind of psych themselves out and they get into this mindset where they feel they have to kind of conform to something or do something because they're scared of what the alternative is. And they're not thinking about, okay, well, what are like potential positive outcomes as opposed to like just the negatives, right? And honestly, challenge, risk taking, it's all kind of part of it. How are you supposed to grow? How do you build your character if you don't? Anyway, to answer your question, so I said, you know what, I'm gonna give this another chance. I really want to try and really take in and expand beyond the world of like my four walls, right? um because everything is going to look a certain way, um if you're convincing yourself to think that way, and if you're just kind of stuck in a certain environment that you're used to. Once you go out there and you actually go network, and not just digitally but actually going out to these different events, or even just to meet up with somebody somewhere, or to do some kind of collaboration, especially in my case with the whole acting and modeling thing, like when you go out, even if you're just doing test shoots, you're doing creatives or some kind of like passion project, whatever. There are so many revelations that you can have from that. And also just being out there to be around people in general, I think really makes a big difference for the psyche as well, and your mental health, and just like remembering how to socialize. Because I feel like, especially being cooped up for as long as we have been, I feel like sometimes we kind of lose that a little bit, mixed in with the fear of the unknown and the future and all of that, as opposed to, maintaining some form of neighborliness and community, like what they used to do back in the day. And that was kind of how they survived, right? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And tell us about how you started landing your first like few clients. You told us briefly about your story about Jessica and how you and
Mhm.
your you and her brother went to the same school, so there was a warm network. And you also told us that you had some friends that were starting content agencies, so you were getting some work that way. But how else did you generate business in the first couple of years?
I guess with my first attempt at freelancing, um, through school, in a sense, it was kind of easy to find out about jobs because, once you go to student publications, for example, and you get to know some of the writers and the editors and other such people in these, how do you say it in English? I completely forgot. Like these, like firms, I guess. Um, and you go, and whether you're volunteering or getting paid some kind of honorarium, or even possibly even making something kind of substantial, you get to talking with them, and you learn about like who they've written for. And so you try submitting too, and seeing if that works out. Like there are like news bulletins, there's magazines, online print, there's other newspapers that they've done internships for, or done like part-time writing for, or volunteering and stuff like that. And that's kind of how you well, that was one of the ways that you could like learn about those, and shoot your shot and see what happens. And even if it's not a long-term thing, even if it's not totally sustainable, at least you could have something for your portfolio. um so like for the first little bit it was a little more like that, and then you saw a rise in not Craigslist, it was it was like Indeed. I think Glassdoor was what it was called, and a bunch of those. You got to learning about a lot of those because, again, like a lot of students would talk about them and they would like recommend them to you. And even just as a side note, when you go to university or college or whatever, it is a totally different world from high school. You're having people from all walks of life. So you're bound to hear about opportunities. And there are so many different clubs and these memberships, whatever, that give you access. And even some like programs, like as you're studying. For example, I knew people who were actually in the professional writing program. I wasn't, I was in criminology. But they also would get a lot of opportunities like through those classes, kind of like how like actors, for example, through the drama programs, whatever, they kind of would get similar opportunities as well, like for auditions and to create student films and stuff like that. Yeah, so that was definitely, those are some of like the biggest ways that I was learning about opportunities and kind of building from there. um, and working with like fellow students as well on their projects, that could definitely help you like get more exposure, get your stuff noticed, but also just getting your personality and for people to like see you as well, the person like behind the computer screen. As for coming out of corporate and going back into freelancing the second time, yeah, as you were saying, it was pretty much just trying to reconnect or to properly connect, with people that like I knew about, and then discovering like more about them, and like yeah, learning about a lot of opportunities through them and kind of like the brands that they work with. And eventually from there, you just kind of, you either gain the confidence or gain the inspiration to kind of go out and see. And social media is also really helpful in that regard, especially because, the algorithm and all that, it more or less knows what you want to see or whatever. And so you do end up coming across a lot of other companies, for copywriting. And in your case, I imagine like resume writing, you learn about a lot of other people advertising themselves on there too, and they're probably looking for people to help them with certain services, and it kind of just goes from there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I want to ask you is in regards to how do you position yourself in the marketplace for copywriting? There's a lot of copywriters out there. Uh, for example, like resumes could be like $100 to 400. Then you can start getting into career coaching alongside the resume service. So then you're going to thousands of dollars. So how do you differentiate yourself compared to the other people in the marketplace?
It's an interesting question. I guess I kind of develop almost a sort of persona. I It does kind of come a little bit from what I do on YouTube as well. And so I play a little bit more to into like character and being a little bit more, stylistic, and like play on more on my creativity, um, because it's true. And as you say, there are a lot of people, and this isn't to knock anybody who does this, but nevertheless, trying to give some reassurance, there are a lot of people who feel like they have to market themselves a certain way, like a trendy way, in order to sort of fit the mold that people are looking for. But the reality is, you don't have to market yourself to please a whole bunch of people, or to like, increase your likelihood. Because as soon as you try to please everybody, you please no one, right? It's better for you to focus on, first of all, like what are your goals? What are your values? And therefore, what are the kinds of people that and companies that you want to work with? And you have to look at who wants to invest specifically in a certain type of copywriter or whoever it is that's in question, right? You have to look at it, through the lens of they want to invest in you and for what you can do, right? There definitely are companies out there who are just kind of looking for expendable writers or any other creative types, right? Just to be able to like fulfill a quota or whatever. But then you have those who really want to invest in somebody that they can have a relationship with and they can build that kind of rapport with. And that somebody who, A, really understands what their brand is all about, and B, in turn, they really like what they do and they feel that they are a really good fit. And so you can kind of, create strategies together and really collaborate. Because if you're just somebody that's there to fulfill a position, a lot of the times, and certainly this is how it was for me in the past and for a lot of us, and I imagine for you too, so you can relate, they would just they would say, oh, we are open minded and we like creative types, whatever. But the reality is, they kind of just want you to do things a certain way. They might allow for a little bit of input, but ultimately, they're kind of looking for something in particular. Whereas if you could get to a point where somebody took an interest in you for you, then I would say, you're in for a good time, right?
Yeah, and go back to what you said, right? Like, it's all about uh, the riches are in the niches. That's the saying. Because like when you're trying to be somebody to everybody, you become like nobody, right? So I definitely agree in terms of like niching down, because then you have a target market that you can serve. And then in terms of like getting people to know you, like you talk about your YouTube channel, like I create content on LinkedIn, and people reach out to me because by me expressing myself through my content, in a way they kind of develop a relationship with me without without ever directly talking to me. Because of the way I write my content, they feel that connection, and that will help like improve your relationship building and makes selling a lot easier.
Exactly. And also to add to your point, because it's an excellent one, they're getting to know who you are right away without pretenses, without any kind of facade. They know what you're all about. They know your style of writing. They know what kind of language that you use. They know how and in what way you want people to participate with you. And like you want people to be commenting and engaging. Like, you want to have that discourse with people. You really want to create knowledge and build upon something that people can be a part of, and be kind of impactful about it. And that's really what you want. You don't want to be in a place where you are replaceable and unmemorable, and therefore you lose value. And that's why, going back to what I said in the beginning, and this is at least somewhat true, uh, don't chase after whatever the next trend is. It's always much more worth it to be yourself and to work on that. Yes, it's hard, but it's more rewarding, and it makes you a better person as well, as opposed to if you're just taking the easy way out all the time. I do feel like, in a sense, you're losing your humanity if you do that. And also,
Yeah,
I really
there's okay.
that you had the really the saying that you had, like, the riches are for the niches. I'm gonna steal that. I really love that
Well, I
so
didn't
much.
make that. Like, that's a popular phrase. I like don't credit me for it. Like I've heard it like numerous times, like from other people, right? But yeah,
But
that's what I hear. But yeah, like
it's still so true, because what you ultimately want is for people to vouch for you. You want supporters, you want patrons. Like, you don't want this is what you don't want to happen. Like, I know it sounds really cool to have like millions of followers, or I don't know how many clients, like hundreds or thousands, whatever. It all sounds great, but the reality is, are most of those people still going to be around, right? A lot of them are probably just going to ask you to do something for them once or twice, for example, and that's the end of that, right? They're not always going to stay around, but the ones that do stick around are the ones that really know you, they really care about you, and they know that you care about them. And so it's better to just continue nurturing that, as opposed to wanting to be something different for everybody. And that's exhausting too for you. Like, you can't do that.
yeah, exactly. And going back to what you said about um don't always jump onto the next trend. What I've been on LinkedIn since May of 2020, and I see a lot of people like pivoting businesses when they haven't really stuck it out for a long period of time. Like I think the main statistic, so to speak, is that businesses need at least 5 to 10 years before they really become like super profitable. That's at least from what I heard, and I see like these coaches like changing their business model. They go from like career coach to then business coach, as an example, or they may change their target market, or they go from um, becoming a career coach and they sell marketing services. Like they're all over the place. They're trying to um, grab the next big thing. Like there was a one person on LinkedIn, she did a lot of financial stuff, right? And now she turned herself into a TikTok coach. And yes, from what I could see on her LinkedIn, she is making good money, but like, how long is TikTok gonna last, right? Like financial coaching or advisement is like a lifetime skill. Like everybody needs that. Like TikTok right now, yes, people need TikTok right now, but it could fall on the wayside eventually, right? Especially since it's a Chinese app. There has been a lot of talk of banning it. So there again, like you should stick to something that has long term growth, not just try to
Yeah.
grab the dollar when it's hot.
Exactly. Like it, as you know, I want to reiterate kind of what I was saying before, but also clarifying about like not having all of your eggs in one basket. What I mean by this is, you do want to have different streams of income just to be able to, keep afloat. But also you have to, here's the thing, you have to know why you're opening up these different streams of income. Like if you decide you want to have your own podcast, you decide that you want to have your own, I don't know, production company or something like that, you have to have a sense of why you're doing that. How do your life experiences, how does your skill set, how does your education, your business goals, whatever, how do all of these things play into that? How are these different avenues going to support you, and how are they going to benefit your audience? That's what you have to consider. And I mean, these things in and of themselves even are not necessarily trends. I do think that, they can be like viable and sustainable sources of income and, commerce and what have you. um it's just a matter of figuring out like what your brand narrative is, um and figuring out what kind of impact you want to have, and what do you want to see your community doing, with what you've got going, and like your resources, whatever. Like that's what you should be paying attention to, as opposed to, okay, let's say you have your podcast, but then with your podcast you're just following blindly all these different trends of, oh, people are doing this now, like maybe you should do that on your podcast, whatever, like all of a sudden, and you kind of like lose a sense of who you are, and then your audience will notice that as well, and it might be jarring for them. I think something like with this whole Barbie mania, I think like it's a cute idea and it's fun. It doesn't have to be like your entire podcast, your entire YouTube channel or whatever, but just to kind of have a thing dedicated to it is fine, as long as you're not overdoing it with following trends. I think that having some kind of mix of trends that are enduring, um, mixed in with those that are a little bit more new, I think it's okay. And I think I said this to somebody too, or we had this conversation where, it's better to, try out and to kind of stick with like a select few trends that you find are working for your business specifically, as opposed to just sort of dropping everything else and then sticking to the one thing that just came out today, and then who knows how long that's going to be there for, right? Because there are trends that are short term, there are trends that are, long term, or they could evolve into something stable. And again, it all depends on the user, like how do you make of it, you know
Yeah, speaking of like capturing trends, like going back to the Barbie example, a
yeah.
lot of marketers are leveraging like Barbie is like, oh, this is how much Barbie made, or like these are some marketing lessons you can learn from Barbie. Like a lot of these marketers are trend tracking on like the hottest thing right now, which is Barbie, right? So, uh,
Yeah.
again, like they're just getting cheap views. I don't think it really does much to their bottom line. They're just getting cheap views that doesn't really mean much. Like for me, like one of the things that I've learned and from talking to other LinkedIn content creators is the posts that go viral, they never get any business from it. Is the ones that are very niche down that give practical advice. That's where they get the leads.
Exactly. And, as a Barbie fan myself, lifelong, right? I mean, you've had people over the years, for example, on YouTube, those who specialize in like pop culture, those who specialize in reactionaries and video essays and what have you. Like, they've been talking about Barbie and whatever else that has been in like the pop cultural lexicon for a really long time. So, adding to your point, it's not as if the Barbie marketing strategy is anything new. It's always been around. It's just that some of these media outlets, as you were saying, are now capitalizing on it and are trying to kind of make something with it when really it's not going to last for them because they're not usually the place that people would go to for that kind of coverage. Like it's very unusual for them. They're used to seeing a certain type. So again, it's either it's going to be off-putting or it's just not going to have people stick around like new people like sticking around like much longer, right? And so it's better to just have your little fun, like everything in moderation, but ultimately keep things consistent, right? And have people grow with
Yeah,
you.
and yeah, exactly. And going to like trends and highlighting your value proposition and like competitors. So let's talk about like the big thing right now, which is AI, which is what we introduced our discussion today about. Uh,
Yeah.
copy. So yeah, so AI copywriting. People can just like write uh write prompts on ChatGPT, for example, and say, write me a LinkedIn post about like ABC, and then they'll write something, and then sometimes they won't even bother editing it; they just like copy and paste it, right?
Oh,
So, have you seen a disruption in your business when uh, ChatGPT first launched and people were starting to use it, or were you not affected that much because you were able to sell yourself and build your brand that it wasn't really a competition?
it's an interesting question, and I think it ultimately, yeah, like it ultimately depends on like what spheres are you in and who you're marketing yourself towards. Like I find that I myself have not seen much of a difference. And I think it's because I'm very lucky that the majority of the people that I'm surrounded by, and even people who are not directly in my industry, understand that there are potential concerns with this new technology, and that we should not just immediately be jumping on the bandwagon. Um, and then you do have sort of this like fear mongering coming from both sides. Like you have one side that's so paranoid and so scared that this thing is just going to eventually like take over all of our jobs. Um, and then you have the other side that's really encouraging people to take this on, uh, because they believe that those who use this will still be able to thrive in their industry and make more money, um, and still be able to have like time to do things. I mean, it's a really complex issue. There's definitely a lot to unpack there. I don't know how much we'll be able to do in this one episode, but we'll try to do a little bit of magic, and we'll see.
Yeah, for sure. And right now, as of this recording, there's that actor strike, writer strike right now. And one of the things that they're discussing about is limiting the use of AI in script writing, because there's a fear. Again, going back to the fear mongering, they think that these big studios will start replacing these writers with AI tools to help them write scripts.
Absolutely. I mean, with big companies, it doesn't surprise me. Like the really funny thing is, at first glance, someone might think, oh, it's going to be the studios and the companies that don't really have all that much money that are going to try and capitalize on this, while the big studios, they have all the money in the world, they don't care. I don't think that's so much the case. I do think that, once you get past a certain threshold, it kind of gets to your head a little bit. And we've seen it time and time again throughout human history. Like those that have the most money, it's a predictable pattern, right? They're going to find ways, they're going to cut corners to be able to make more and to, maintain that sort of control and divide. Um, but I do think that there is a silver lining with this. There are good things that are going to come out of this. And even things that were always sort of there, but I guess we kind of took them for granted before. But for example, we're going to see a boom in independent studios who do have empathy and who do understand like things like ethics and are also kind of logical about this stuff, who are going to be willing to work with like humans. Um, we're going to see a rise even more so in live performances. We're going to be seeing, I personally think we're going to be seeing even more print advertising again. Like basically things that have always just been kind of secondary for a while. I find that because there's a market for people that see value in things that were made by humans, and they understand that originality, creativity, complex emotions and experiences, and all kinds of different things that we ourselves came up with, these cannot be replaced by AI. Therefore, they're going to be willing to continue investing in that. Like, for example, there are still people who buy vinyl records. There are still legal firms that use typewriters, right? Because they see either they see value in that, they have a certain pride in still being able to use these things. But I also heard apparently typewriters are actually more effective than computers for like a certain like document that they make. I'm not 100% sure because I'm not in the legal industry, so don't quote me on that. That's just something that I've heard. You're still seeing people going out to the theater, even movie theaters. Like movie theaters get packed like for superhero films, right? You still have people who buy like physical books, myself included. Um, you still have people who um, who connect and relate to others, and when they see something, read something, or witness something that was written or made or painted or what have you by somebody else, they are so fascinated by it. It invokes emotions. They want to know, like, how was this made? Why was this made? What does it mean? Or trying to find the deeper meaning in something. And especially when it's now granted, much like how there are people who try to be original, there have been those who don't, and you kind of see copy and paste sort of. You've heard that before, right? Where you see a lot of like an oversaturation of a certain genre or a storyline or something like that. There's always going to be some form of that. Um, but going back to my original point, AI. It's always going to be one step behind us, in my honest opinion, because it cannot create its own things. It relies on us to do that for them, to train them on certain content, and to get used to, okay, like what kind of things should I be looking for, and blah blah blah. And then the technology itself, it's always going to be like changing. And so there will come a point where older versions are not really going to matter anymore, stuff like that. And so the question is this stuff really that reliable? are we always going to be able to get it to function properly? And then there's the whole issue with like funding, right? Because a lot of money needs to go into it for it to be able to stay online and to operate. What happens if we don't have that, right? And then what was another issue with it? I'm trying to think. There was something else as well with it. Right. You know about all these like phishing scams and all like these like,
Yeah, fishing. Yeah, I know fishing. Yeah.
yeah, and like the phone calls and stuff like that. Like that's gonna get even worse because there currently are little to no regulations. They're working on it, which is a good thing in all the countries. But right now, people will get much better at scamming and then potentially committing fraud. And then, getting you to click on things, which will result in like hacking and security breaches and data breaches and all kinds of stuff like that. And it's going to essentially make the internet even more unsafe than it is now, right? Like, I get nervous about paying for something online, let alone having some scammer like send me something. What if I accidentally open it and then who knows what it's going to do, right? Like, that's going to become a really big issue as well. And then another thing, of course, identity theft, plagiarism, these are all really, big issues. But then even like, when they say, oh, it's only because it's the early version, I don't know, like, even as it's supposedly evolving, I can still tell that it was AI generated. Like, it doesn't look tangible at all. Like, when I see like a visual representation of something, like, it's still like uncanny valley. It's very vacant. It's very weird. And then like with photos, for example, like the lighting is always off, the shading and the textures, like it's very, very strange, and I don't know. I don't really see it getting any better, to be honest. I don't know. I do
Yeah.
think, as you were saying before on our LinkedIn Live, that the fear and the panic surrounding it, on the one hand, is overblown. I do think people have the right to be concerned about it because of the ethics, and just because of like, pure logic as well. Because what if we solely rely on these, machines for everything, right? I mean, look at self-checkout, for example. There have been stores pulling self-checkouts because of how easy it is now to shoplift, right? And it's just allowing for too many things to like slip past the radar. And of course, and even now, like, cause I go grocery shopping and all that, and I still go to humans, and I see people like struggling to use these self-checkout tools. Then you have people going up to assist them like every 2 seconds. And it's just like, what's the point? Technical issues. And I don't think it works as efficiently as they're making it out to be. I don't know. Like, I don't mind if this thing was just kind of like as a last resort. And in the case of us writers, for example, like if we really are struggling with writer's block and we just don't have time to, get through it the usual way. And especially like if you just need some kind of like idea to kind of really get the juices going in your mind, like, okay, I guess it's fine. But I would say, like, just know your limits, know your boundaries with it, and understand that the work ultimately has to come from you. And that's like with anything that you use, like a walking cane, for example, right? Like, yeah, it helps you to stay up and everything, but you're still doing the walking yourself, right? For example, maybe a slightly tactless example, but like my point still stands, right? Humans are a lot more resilient and capable of things. My point is. than we realize, right? And critical thinking, problem solving, like creating things like this is what we were meant to do ultimately. Yes, these things can potentially expedite the process, help us get the resources that we need, and then we're there to kind of transform it, right? To make something original.
Yeah, and going back to what you said about it's about create an experience, and AI doesn't really give you that experience. Like going back to what you said about like the vinyl records, right? Like I saw an article a couple of weeks ago where Taylor Swift released one of her re-recordings of one of her old albums, and there was a vinyl edition of it, and there was a huge lineup to get the vinyl record. So it goes back to like building your brand and building an experience with your product. Another example would be watches, right? Like we have our smartphones that can tell time, but people still want a watch to tell time, even though it's not logical because the watch gives them an experience. It's some people collect watches, similar with stamps, right? Like so there people collect stamps as well. So again, uh, I think AI will like assist people, but ultimately you have to sell an experience that makes them want to like work with you and engage with you, and that's ultimately what every human wants is that engagement and human interaction and and feeling connected with who they're interacting with.
Exactly. And it's also a big wake up call, I would say, to people, and to let them know that they really have to push themselves to see their full potential and to become better writers, to become better dancers, or what have you, right? Um, because this stuff is really just meant to be kind of like a guidepost, like with any technology, right? I mean, obviously AI is like a step above the usual machinery that we have, dishwashers, whatever. um, but ultimately, like, the sentiment is still very much the same. And again, ironically, it's gonna get people to do a lot more things offline. We're gonna be seeing a lot more of that, and I do think we're slowly gonna start seeing like people really like interacting more beyond just the computer screen again, and to really just go out and to experience people like doing all of these amazing things that we were always capable of doing, and have that entertainment, have that insightfulness. There's always going to be takeaways, and really, like, when you think of it, like analogies as well, like, we on LinkedIn know this. When oftentimes the best LinkedIn posts come from people using analogies cleverly, like things that they heard from somebody that they thought was really interesting, or something that they experienced, or they play a sport or something like that, and they're able to like take something and then relate it to their job or whatever it is they're trying to teach their followers, that maybe even we might have never thought of, and we're like, oh my gosh, that's actually really smart. And then you really have to think about, like, how do they make that connection? Like, it really does cause you to think. And again, like, unless we're feeding this stuff to the AI, it's not going to know that. And not to mention, like, it doesn't have context, it doesn't have like nuance. It doesn't understand things or is able to make connections the same way we do, or we can, or to just really like think outside the box, right? It's always just going to be so very generic. I personally think. I don't know.
Going back to what you said about like people are getting tired of interacting via computer. One of the things about podcasting that's getting more popular is in-person podcast recordings. Statistics have shown that the podcasts that are in person tend to have higher engagement and higher watch time compared to the Zoom style podcast where you have like the dual screens side by side and then they switch between people. Uh, it seems like people are just getting tired of these because it's oversaturated. You see a lot of Zoom style podcasts, and you don't see a lot of those like in person because in person seems like it's a TV show, right? So they feel it's higher quality and they want to watch it more compared to a Zoom style podcast that we're doing right now, unfortunately. But over
know.
time, like I have you in the next episode. Maybe I'll have a studio and then you can come in person. But for now, I'm building it up, and we'll have to make do with virtual podcast.
Exactly. And it's almost like you're watching improv or you're watching a radio show, except it's, live. You're actually seeing the people, you have the visual, right? Like there's so many ways to take that. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen people say, like, wow, I'm so excited because my two favorite people are going to be collaborating on a podcast. They're actually going to be like in the same room. Like, what kind of dynamics are they going to have? What kind of jokes are they going to be able to make with each other? Are they going to like play games or something like that? And it's harder to do. I mean, you can still kind of do some stuff like that when it's like this, but not to the same extent. And then what if you have to do like a screen share or something? It just gets like more complicated. But yeah,
So yeah.
say.
So we shouldn't completely bash like AI, right, or like technical tools. There are some benefits to it, and I'm sure as a copywriter yourself, you have a tech stack that helps you with like whether it's like project management or help you organize better, or better interaction or collaboration with your clients. So what are some of your tools that you use to help improve your copywriting business?
I do use, quite a bit. Like Grammarly is one of them. Granted, it's not 100% accurate, especially because it doesn't always take into consideration like the regional dialects, like with Canadian spelling and whatever. But it is like helpful for the most part, remembering like very little like copy edits that definitely make a difference, especially, well, it doesn't take into consideration the Oxford comma. That's one thing that bothers me. But other than that, there are definitely a lot of other tools as well, that you could use that I think are really helpful. I actually have a list here that I can absolutely share. Let me just get that up, because it is actually something that we're gonna be talking about on LinkedIn very soon. While that's loading, uh, there's also Active Campaign, for example, that I think is definitely really good for those who want to take newsletters to the next level. For example, like you have so many different options and customizables and templates that you could put things together where you're not just writing something out and then that's the end of that. No, like you can still link to trainings, for example, webinars, other resources that you might have that you created yourself that are really useful for people. But also, you can share some of the things that you like, that you think are essentials, or others in your industry that you think are really credible and that are worth checking out. Like, it's a really good way to kind of build that community and to build support for others and show that, it's not just about you, but it's about others as well. And it's also a really good way to share like freebies as well, and like prizes. And it's just really dynamic in how, yes, you can have long form content, but you can also have more short form, like, quotes that you could come up with, like, really like zingy kind of things, slogans, or asking questions, like having a prompt. And so then that would get people to engage with you more, and to click on your links as well. So that's definitely one that I would recommend. And oh, this is taking so long. But another one is CoSchedule. And what's really cool about that is you could actually test your email subject lines, for example, to see like how well they would perform based on what keywords are you using. How long are they? Do they use numbers? Do they describe like things like listicles, for example? Like sometimes like the little tweaks really do make a difference. And also you do want to try and being a little bit catchy, or thought provoking, or asking a question, for example, or creating a statement that will elicit a response from somebody. So it's really great for that. Another one, finally, here it is. Okay. I use Google Sheets pretty heavily as well. I think it's a really great tool. It's not just for accounting. You can also use it. It's really like a comprehensive way to organize all of your items, like all the projects that you have ongoing or that you want to do. You can create all these different tabs, and then you have categories that you could make as well, for things that, for example, you're planning but are still kind of in the back burner, or you might have things that are ongoing or things that are finished. You could, highlight them just so you remember, oh, we already did this. It's, onto a different idea, or to kind of look back and think, oh, we should probably consider like the performance of that. And so is it possible to do a part two, or how do we evolve from it? Another one, on speaking of LinkedIn, the Sales Navigator is your best friend right now. For a while, I was using hashtags for my community management, and now it's practically useless at this point. The algorithm does not really favor them for community management really anymore. Like, you still want to use them just to have the people in the relevant industries find you for discoverability. But in terms of like going there and to engage with and comment on other people's content, it's really not great, because I think LinkedIn is not really at a point yet where it's great at targeting, kind of curating, like kind of more of an ideal audience. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect, obviously, but to kind of head towards, the people in certain places and certain industries that you want to be noticing you. It's just kind of really random. It's basically the wild, wild west right now. So I recommend, back to my point, the LinkedIn Sales Navigator. It's really good because, you get the connections that you want, and, you make lists of like, leads that you want to either reach out to or follow up with, and you can categorize them based on whatever industry that they're in. And it makes it so easy to just find them, go to them and interact with them, and kind of keep things consolidated that way, as opposed to just going to these hashtags and who knows what you're going to get at this point, right? Calendly is also a really good one for scheduling, and it cross-references everything that you use, like for scheduling your meetings, whatever. So it avoids, double booking and conflicts, and keeping you up to date about all the appointments that you have. Canva is one other really big one that we use for, all our graphic design. Of course, we do like consult with a graphic designer to get like really personalized and branded stuff, right? That's really unique to us and therefore recognizable. We're not just, throwing together whatever in just a matter of, right? Like, there's still like thought that goes into that. StreamYard. So I am thinking about maybe I should switch to Zencaster. But StreamYard, I think, is really good for when you're going live. It's definitely a competitor to Twitch. I personally watch Twitch like for gaming. But I think maybe StreamYard is really good for those of us who are not in like those particular niches, but are a little bit more widespread. And Gmail is, another, and I know it
Everybody
sounds
knows
really
Gmail. Everyone knows Gmail. Yeah.
Gmail, but it's tried and true. Like, it really is the best one. I think that Yahoo is a little bit all over the place right now. Hotmail is Okay, I don't even think it's called Hotmail anymore. I think it's called like Microsoft Outlook or something like that. Like it's constantly changing, but I don't really use that anymore. But it's just kind of meh. Um, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really good stuff out there. Uh, and these are just examples of like what I use with Jessica, what I use with some of my other um, agencies as well. That I absolutely think that people shouldn't sleep on. And even if you think it is kind of generic, this stuff really does, and most of it, if not all of it, is cost effective. There absolutely are those that have like the paid subscriptions and stuff like that, but you have your different tiers depending on what you need. But again, like it's really worth it. Like you're getting so much for however little you pay for them, right? As opposed to some other subscription services out there, looking at the Adobe Creative Suite that makes its stuff so unbelievably pricey, and yet it
Yeah,
has its issues.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you made a good point, right? Like you don't need to spend hundreds of dollars to get started. Just a few tools. Like again, like Gmail is pretty cheap, and if you get Google Business Suite, you get their sheets. Word. You basically don't even need Microsoft Office at that point, and it's a much more affordable price. Calendly
Oh
to schedule like calls, right? Canva if you're not a graphic designer with Photoshop or Illustrator, you can always do some like quick template stuff for your copywriting. So you have definitely introduced my audience to like at least a beginner tech stack for copywriting if they want to get started there. But to like wrap up our conversation, what is some advice for you? What is some advice that you provide to people listening that are wanting to be aspiring copywriters to help them get started in the right direction?
I would say, first and foremost, really own your craft and really develop your style. And what I mean by that is really explore who you are, as a person, and then in different like places in your life, right? Like when you're in business mode, when you're, you know, offline or whatever, like, what's the difference? But then how can you also leverage all these different facets of your life? How can all of these things be like kind of reflected in your writing? How do you make that compromise? Because I do think that personal branding is really important to a degree. Obviously, like not too much to the point where people kind of forget what you do and what you are in the first place, and you're just kind of there to be just vibing or whatever it is that the kids say these days. But just enough that you want people to find you relatable, and to see how relevant your thoughts are, and you know even if they don't necessarily relate, or even if they don't share the same opinion as you, it could really be an eye opener in terms of how many voices there are out there and how many different perspectives. And so, how do you reconcile all of that? So, going back to what I was saying, like when you're discovering who you are as a writer, and what roles different roles you have in your life, um, like really like establish those principles for yourself, and that's really going to make a big difference in how you grow as a writer. Because to be a writer, and they're going to say the same thing with really any kind of profession, you have to live life, definitely, to an extent. And it certainly does help to have a background in something else. And like they said this like back in school too, and that's one of the reasons why I did criminology and political science, as opposed to like professional writing, because you have to have some scope, and you have to have some kind of perspective that will really help be sort of a gateway to all these different things the world is your oyster. So many cliches, but it's so true. And you kind of have to decide, how is all of this going to help me build my brand? How is this going to help me become a thought leader, create all this content, and also really think about when you're using certain platforms, what content is going to be conducive to those platforms, like what will be appropriate, because what you do on LinkedIn, for example, might not necessarily work for Instagram or for Facebook, however relevant Facebook still is, or Twitter, even though Twitter is kind of in shambles right now. But yeah, and that's another thing too. Like when you start out writing, you also have to consider, where do you want to go? What kind of people do you want to have following you? Because again, it seems cool to have all kinds of people sort of tuning in, but what if those people don't necessarily convert into consumers or people that are going to be a part of like a long part of your long-term community? Or what if they're just there to be trolls or to be bullies, or just lurkers at the end of the day, or something like that, just kind of passive, or they're not being constructive in any way? These are definitely things you have to consider. And even though I did that a lot in this podcast, don't rely on cliches. I think having a play on cliches or catchphrases or stuff like that, like wordplay, I think that it's okay to derive inspiration, and not just for little things like that, but for anything that you write. But always find ways to make it your own, do something different with it, kind of respond to it in a way. Um, Definitely take a stance and have your own opinion on things, like apply yourself, right? And that's what's going to make you a strong writer. You don't necessarily need to have flowery writing or really like super sophisticated sounding writing in order to do your job well. Like certainly there are those of us who prefer to write that way, or know when to use it and know when to use different styles. But ultimately, and especially if you are on LinkedIn and for your purposes, like you don't have to do that. But I would say, don't try to do what everybody else does. Do try to use some language that may sound interesting or uncommon, and have people say, oh wow, I learned a new word today, or oh wow, that's such an interesting way to put that, right? Like experiment. It is hard, but again, it really can be so much fun, uh, if you're not pressuring yourself to be a certain way. And on the other end, if you're not allowing yourself to be bogged down by the negativity, and especially the online sphere does tend to have a lot of negative Nancy's. So definitely don't let any of that get you down. Ask for help too, consult with other writers that kind of get their input, have them look at your stuff and get them to help you edit maybe. If you're still in school, definitely try going to publications, write for your local newspaper, write for magazines, even if it's just for volunteering in the beginning, devote some of your time, not all of it, but a little bit can definitely go a long way. Have that connection. Writing is it's very easy for it to become very isolating if you're not sharing your work, or if you're not taking in what others have to say, or sharing your expertise. And oftentimes, like a lot of the time, like some of your best writing just comes from having conversations with people, and then you'll jot it down or something, or commit to memory, and you end up creating something out of that. It's almost like you have to think of it as a conversation, but it also has to be presented a certain way, right? Sometimes it's more poetic, sometimes it's a little bit more I don't want to say professional, but that's the word that comes to my mind at the moment. It's I guess more sophisticated, maybe that's a better way to say it. Sometimes it's more it's more like powerful or forceful, especially if you want it to be like actionable. If you want people to take a stand on something, for example, then yeah, you kind of want to use writing that's a little bit more like impassioned. That's just an example though. There are many different ways to go about it, and you honestly just have to use your intuition, but also, don't be afraid to like look at inspiration or to ask for somebody's input or something like that. And then you just mess around with it pretty much.
Yeah, for sure. And to wrap up our conversation, I ask this question at the end of my podcast for all my guests. So, as you know, my podcast is about helping professionals overcome career challenges to help them get to the next level. So, for you, throughout your journey in freelancing, copywriting, acting, modeling, what was one big career challenge that you had to overcome to get to where you are today?
There have been quite a few, honestly, especially if you're in like the freelance sphere. It's very up and down. And it's something that I don't know will ever truly see stability. And that's why I say, like, if you have a knack for something, if you're able to kind of use certain skill sets that you have and apply them in different avenues, and I say go for it, start that channel that you want or whatever. Um, but with freelancing itself, it's always tough because there are still a lot of people, especially with that corporate mindset, that don't fully understand it, especially when it comes to pricing. Like for us creative types, for example, like it's even hard, explaining to people sometimes, you know, paying by the project, paying by the package, for example, as opposed to paying by the hour. Because, speaking from myself, and I'm sure there are others that will see this the same way, it seems very archaic at this point to pay by the hour because you're not really paying for the time that it takes someone to do something. You're paying for like the value of the thing itself and what it's going to do for your brand or for your company or whatever, and like the transformations it's going to make and what it's going to do for the customer's journey and for experience and for like the long term, community outreach and all this kind of stuff, right? Like that's where the investment comes in. You're not just there paying someone to just kind of do something for you, and because of like the time it takes, like that's not where the value is. And like because the truth is we do a lot of things in life that take time, but not all of it is being paid for, right? Even sometimes with work that we do, like we're not always going to be compensated for that, but we do it anyway, right? Whether it's for goodwill or it's something that kind of just has to be part of the job, like whatever the circumstances. But my point being, for example, you have a package of, let's say, in the context of copywriting, the copywriter is going to deliver to you a couple newsletters and some emails and maybe some other copy for like your website and for your social media, your video platforms, or what have you, right? And it's all being presented in a package, and of course, all the things in that package are meant to have the same goal. But the thing is, all these different things that someone writes for you, they're going to have their own purpose. They're not all meant to like function the same way. Like, yes, the bottom line is they are going towards one common goal for your brand, which is whatever you need your customers to do, depending on what your product or your service is. But each thing is doing something different to have them get to that point. So, for example, when you write an email, The point with the email is to create like touch points for the consumer. So you need them to be engaging with you, to gauge their interest, to gauge their pain points, and therefore with that, what are the subsequent emails in the sequence going to be? You have to personalize it for them. You have to be paying attention to what they want in order to create an experience that delights them, and ultimately, yeah, that's gonna convert them into a buyer, get them what they need, whatever. But also, they're gonna have an experience that made them feel cared for, or made them want to do more, get involved, and all that sort of stuff, and change their life, that sort of thing, right? Whereas with like short form copy, it's not going to do the same thing. Oftentimes, with short form copy, it might be there to describe like in three short bullet points, like the benefits of that product or service, right? So it's meant to like say right then and there what it's going to how it's going to help. So you're not focusing on, for example, the features of the thing. Like nobody really cares about like the technical talk, but it's more so like, how is their life going to be enlightened in any way? And that's another example. And so all of these different things, they're doing something different, but they're all geared toward the same goal. And so going back to the point with the whole pricing thing, that's why it's important for people to see these things as value driven, as opposed to just kind of like, okay, well, this is going to be something in the checklist to cross off or something like that. And I do think that therefore it is important for people who are a little bit more old school to start thinking about it in these terms, to think about it as like long-term investments, to think about it as enhancing and really establishing their identity, as opposed to just, oh, okay, we'll have this out and people will see it, and that's the end of that sort of thing, right? In hopes that people are just immediately going to be on board and, oh, we're going to get this thing. But it doesn't work like that, especially not today. Maybe back then it worked, but now, no. Like people, the consumer's voice is far more powerful now than, and I would argue it always hasn't, but people didn't really realize it. Now consumers are far more active, and proactive, and they are very much influencing how we create our marketing than ever before. And even you've seen it, to the point where people use a lot of consumer generated content on their social channels, for example, and even on their website. And it's not even just testimonials anymore. Like you have people sending in videos of themselves doing something or using the product or whatever. You see influencers doing that. And all of these things are meant to, again, add to that whole story and experience. And so this is how we kind of have to be shifting in terms of like our creativity, and not see it so much as like a very like cut and dry thing, very calculated. You know what I mean? So that's something that I think has to be discussed a little bit more. That's definitely like a big challenge, getting them to understand, like, it sounds like you're paying a lot, but in reality, you're getting what you're paying for, right? So,
Absolutely. And again, appreciate you taking the time, Mila, out of your day to come talk to me about copywriting, how to build a copywriting business, the disruption of AI. So, how can people reach out to you to learn more about what you do and how you can help them, whether it's to help them with copywriting or just give them career advice on how they can become a successful copywriter?
sure. So I guess My main social media at this point would be Instagram, creative_memes, and then LinkedIn if people want to reach out to me over there, although I'm not very good at. See, I say all these things, but I'm not actually very good at like posting like my own content that I'm not doing for other people. But they can check me out there as well. The only thing I'm not too sure is do they search you up based on like the URL, or do they search you up based on your name? Because I know with like Instagram and whatever, like you can just give the handle.
LinkedIn is based on name. LinkedIn is based on name.
Okay, so then just the Mila M, MA, indicating I have my master's, and the little monkey. I added the emoji. I saw somebody use an emoji on LinkedIn, and I thought, okay, well, I'll just use mine as well to kind of stand out a little bit more. I don't know. Seeing how it goes.
You gotta stand out somehow, right? So the monkey emoji might be your branding statement.
Yeah, it has been for a long time. So I thought, why not?
Again, I appreciate the time and enjoy the rest of your night.
Me too. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for watching. For more content on careers, job search, and self-improvement, make sure to hit that subscribe button.